What happens when a human being breaks a promise, not to another person, but to the universe itself? Throughout history, hidden within temples, whispered among mystics, and carried like fire in the hearts of initiates, there has been a teaching. Words spoken in sacred intent carry the weight of destiny itself. When you vow something before the divine, whether you call it God, the source, or simply the vast intelligence that governs existence, you are weaving threads into the very fabric of reality. But what happens when those threads are suddenly cut? What forces are unleashed when an oath made with the soul is shattered by the will of the ego? Legends across cultures speak of oaths as chains of light or chains of iron. The Norse spoke of the kneading's curse, the eternal dishonor that falls upon an oath-breaker. In ancient Egypt, vows were believed to echo into the halls of Mot, where the soul would one day be weighed. And in esoteric traditions, a spiritual oath is not just a contract, it is a living entity, bound to you as surely as your own shadow. To break such an oath is not a mere mistake. It is to set yourself against the laws of balance, to invite chaos into the order you once declared. In this video, we will uncover the hidden history of oaths and vows, why they have always been regarded with such awe and terror, and the metaphysical forces that awaken when such promises are betrayed. We will explore the subtle consequences, psychological, energetic, and even karmic, that ripple out when a sacred word is broken. And finally, we will look at how one might heal, repair, or transcend the burden of an oath fractured. For what is at stake is not just honor, but the very alignment of the soul itself. Across the tapestry of human history, one truth emerges again and again. Oaths are never treated lightly. To our ancestors, a vow was not a mere string of words. It was a binding force, a sacred thread that linked the human to the divine, the finite to the infinite. In ancient Mesopotamia, kings swore oaths upon the gods of heaven and earth. These promises were sealed in the presence of statues of the deities, as if the stone itself absorbed the vow. To break it was to unleash divine wrath, not only upon the individual, but upon their land and lineage. The Assyrians had a word for oath-breaking, ma'amitu, a curse that could follow a family for generations. In Greece, the gods themselves feared the breaking of an oath. Hesiod tells us of Horkos, the spirit of oath, born from night, who punishes oath-breakers with ruin and decay. To swear falsely was to invite Horkos to shadow every step, draining fortune and health until balance was restored. Egypt carried an even deeper mystery. To speak a vow before Maat, the goddess of truth and cosmic order, was to inscribe your soul into eternity. At death, when the heart was weighed against the feather of truth, broken vows were thought to tip the scales, binding the spirit to lower realms. Here, an oath was not just a contract, it was a measurement of alignment with cosmic law itself. The Hebrews, too, recognized the power of vows. The Nazirite oath, for example, dedicated one's entire being to God, requiring abstinence from wine, ritual purity, and uncut hair as signs of devotion. To violate such an oath was not just personal dishonor, it was seen as a fracture in one's covenant with the divine. In Hinduism and Buddhism, vows, vrata and samaya, are central to spiritual practice.
A monk's vows are threads holding together their karma and dharma. To break them is not simply failure. It is believed to entangle the soul in layers of karmic consequence, delaying enlightenment for lifetimes. What is striking across these traditions is not just the universality of oaths, but the terror that surrounds their breaking. Whether through divine punishment, karmic entanglement, or spiritual dishonor, every culture recognized that vows touch something far deeper than social order. They touch the invisible laws that govern the cosmos. Philosophically, the oath can be understood as an alignment of intent, word, and spirit. To make a vow is to take an inner potential and fix it into form. In Hermetic thought, as above, so below, as within, so without. The vow is the bridge between the inner and the outer world. To shatter that bridge is to disrupt the symmetry of one's life, to invite dissonance where harmony was intended. Thus, when we speak of spiritual oaths, whether vows of chastity, silence, loyalty, or devotion, we are not speaking of mere rules. We are speaking of metaphysical contracts written in the invisible ink of the soul. Breaking them is like tearing pages from the book of destiny itself.
To understand what happens when a spiritual oath is broken, we must first understand what a spiritual oath actually is. Unlike casual promises or agreements, a spiritual oath is not made with the tongue alone. It is made with the soul. It is not a contract on paper, but a weaving of energy, thought, intention, and willpower into the subtle fabric of reality. Think of the human soul as a harp of many strings. Each vow, when made with sincerity, plucks one of those strings in harmony with the greater song of the universe. It produces a resonance, a vibration that aligns the individual with a specific path or purpose. When the vow is kept, the music is pure. The soul grows stronger, clearer, more attuned. But when the vow is broken, that harmony collapses into dissonance, like a harp string snapping. The music falters, and the vibration that once brought order now summons chaos. The nature of spiritual contracts. In esoteric traditions, oaths are often described as contracts not only with divine beings, but also with one's higher self. When you swear devotion, purity, silence, or service, you are binding your lower, earthly nature to the higher truth that resides beyond time. It is as if two parts of you, mortal and eternal, shake hands. Breaking such an oath, then, is not simply failing in a moral sense. It is an act of rebellion against your own higher nature. The fracture is internal before it ever manifests externally. A part of you remembers the vow while another part betrays it, and this creates an inner war, a tearing of the soul. This is why so many ancient traditions warned that breaking oaths leads to madness, misfortune, or illness. Not because an external deity must strike you down, but because the soul itself cannot abide in contradiction for long. Energetic consequences. On an energetic level, a spiritual vow can be imagined as a thread of light binding you to a higher current. When the vow is broken, that thread becomes tangled, frayed, or corrupted. Energy no longer flows smoothly. Instead, blockages form in the subtle body. You may feel drained, restless, or plagued by unexplainable guilt. Nightmares often arise not as punishments from gods, but as the subconscious struggling to reconcile a fracture in spiritual integrity. Some traditions speak of oath demons or entities that feed on the energy of broken vows. In reality, these can be understood as thought forms, energetic shadows created by the force of betrayal.
When you break a vow, especially one made in sacred ritual, the energy released does not vanish. It crystallizes into patterns, often parasitic, that cling to your aura until balance is restored. Psychological and karmic effects. Psychologically, an unkept vow festers. You may attempt to forget it, rationalize it, or bury it under layers of excuses, but the subconscious remembers. Deep within, the self knows it is broken alignment with truth. This can manifest as self-sabotage, chronic indecision, or an inability to trust oneself. After all, if you betrayed your own deepest word once, what certainty can you rely on in the future? Karmically, the breaking of an oath is like planting a seed of dissonance. Because the vow was made with heightened intention, the karmic echo is amplified. The universe does not punish, it simply reflects. And what you have projected is inconsistency, betrayal, or abandonment of duty. Those same lessons return to you until they are integrated. This is why broken vows often lead to cycles of repeated failure or suffering, as if the soul is replaying the scenario until it learns the true cost of dishonor. Cultural illustrations.
We have seen that breaking a spiritual oath is more than a moral failing. It is a fracture in the soul's alignment with truth. Yet, like all deep spiritual mysteries, the subject is not so simple. In fact, there are nuances and paradoxes hidden within the very fabric of oaths that make the discussion far richer and more dangerous. The paradox of sacred oaths. At the heart of many esoteric traditions lies a paradox. To swear an oath is both an act of power and a potential trap. Why? Because the universe is always changing. The soul evolves, life unfolds in unpredictable patterns, and what once seemed a clear and noble path may, years later, no longer serve higher growth. Thus, the question arises, is the breaking of an oath always a sin, or can it sometimes be a step toward liberation? Consider the story of the Buddha. Before his enlightenment, he experimented with severe ascetic vows, starvation, silence, and self-denial. At one point, he swore never to eat more than a single grain of rice a day. Yet he broke this oath when he realized it led not to wisdom, but to death. To break that vow was, paradoxically, his first step toward the middle way, the balance that allowed him to awaken. Here, the breaking of an oath was not rebellion, but transcendence. This reveals an important truth. Not all vows are equal. Some are ladders to climb higher, others become cages. To cling to a vow made in ignorance or without understanding can sometimes enslave the soul. Thus, breaking it, though painful, may actually be an act of fidelity to the deeper truth within. False and empty oaths. Ancient mystics also warned of false vows, oaths made without full awareness, sincerity, or authority. For instance, a person who swears an oath in anger, intoxication, or desperation may bind themselves to something that was never truly aligned with their soul. Such oaths often decay into spiritual parasites, draining life until released. In Hermetic writings, it is said, to bind without knowledge is to curse oneself twice, first by ignorance, then by consequence. Breaking such oaths still carries a cost, but the greater error was in swearing them without wisdom.
the lesson is not merely to avoid breaking vows, but to take utmost care in making them. The ripple effect of oath breaking. When a vow is broken, the consequences often extend beyond the individual. Because vows are energetic bonds, they weave into the collective fabric. A broken monastic vow weakens the entire monastery. A broken oath of loyalty may ripple into a kingdom's downfall. A broken spiritual oath can even weaken the very lineage or tradition it was tied to. This is why ancient orders, whether the Knights Templar, Buddhist Sanghas, or Sufi brotherhoods, placed such emphasis on discipline. They understood that each member's vow was not only personal, but communal, a strand in a great web. One thread broken threatens the strength of the whole. Oaths and the shadow self. There is another layer, one often left unspoken. Oaths awaken the shadow. When you vow to purity, your shadow tempts you with lust. When you vow to silence, your shadow pushes you toward arrogance in your restraint. When you vow service, your shadow whispers of pride and rebellion. Thus, breaking an oath is rarely sudden. It begins with the shadow testing the edges, pushing against the walls of discipline until a crack forms. Mystics knew this, which is why many vows included rituals of confession or renewal. They recognized that to fight the shadow is part of the path, but to pretend it does not exist is to set oneself up for an inevitable collapse. When an oath is broken, the shadow surges. Guilt, shame, and despair can consume the soul, creating cycles of self-condemnation worse than the original betrayal. The spiritual danger is not only the breaking of the vow, but the inability to forgive oneself afterward. The path of atonement. Yet here lies a hidden teaching. Breaking a vow is not the end. It can be the beginning. In many traditions, atonement rituals exist not to erase the broken oath, but to transmute its energy. In Christianity, confession and penance serve this role. In Hinduism, prayaschitta, acts of purification, are prescribed to rebalance karma. In shamanic traditions, offerings, fasts, or pilgrimages are undertaken to mend the spiritual fabric. The principle is the same. Energy must move. The vow cannot simply be ignored, for its resonance lingers. But through sincere recognition, humility, and corrective action, the discord can be harmonized. The hidden power in release. One of the most esoteric teachings is that even vows themselves can be ritually released. In some traditions, a master, priest, or elder can formally dissolve a vow, freeing the soul from its binding. In Tibetan Buddhism, broken tantric vows can be restored through ritual, mantra, and meditation. In Western esotericism, certain initiatory oaths can be unbound by higher authority if the soul's path truly demands it. This reveals a key insight. The universe is not merciless. The purpose of vows is not eternal punishment, but alignment. If an oath no longer serves alignment, there are ways, though difficult and rare, to release it consciously rather than break it unconsciously. The choice before every soul. So what truly happens when you break a spiritual oath? The answer is layered. On one level, chaos enters, energetic dissonance, karmic echo, psychological fragmentation. On another level, the breaking can be a catalyst, forcing the soul to confront its shadow, reconsider its path, and refine its integrity. Breaking an oath is like shattering a mirror. At first, all you see are fragments, sharp and dangerous. But with patience, you can gather those shards, reforge them, and perhaps even create a mosaic more beautiful than the original. The danger lies not in the breaking itself, but in denial, avoidance, or despair. To pretend the vow never existed, to bury the guilt, or to repeat the betrayal without reflection, This is what corrodes the soul. But to face the fracture with humility, to seek restoration or release, is to transform curse into teacher. In the end, oaths are powerful because they reflect the deepest law of the universe, that words, when aligned with will and spirit, create reality. To break them is to break alignment. But even broken alignment can be healed if the soul dares to confront itself honestly. Thus, the mystery of broken vows is not one of doom alone, but of potential. For in the ashes of broken promises lies the chance for a stronger, more conscious bond with self, with others, and with the divine. We have explored the ancient weight of oaths, the consequences of breaking them, and the paradoxes that lie within. But the question remains, what can we do if we have broken a spiritual oath, or fear that we may? Is there a path to healing, to reclaiming alignment, to moving forward without carrying the burden of eternal fracture? The answer is yes, but it requires courage, honesty, and spiritual discipline. Step 1. Recognition and honesty. The first and essential step is to acknowledge the broken vow. Many people, out of shame or fear, try to bury the memory of their oath. But denial only deepens the fracture. Remember, the soul never forgets. The subconscious never forgets. To sit in meditation and honestly recall the vow, its original intention, the moment it was made, and the moment it was broken, is to begin mending the torn fabric. Write it down. Speak it aloud in prayer or ritual. Admit without excuse, "This was my vow. This is how I broke it." This recognition transforms hidden guilt into conscious awareness, the first light of healing. Step 2. Discern the nature of the oath. Not all oaths are equal. Some were made in true alignment with the soul. Others were made under ignorance, coercion, or emotional extremes. The next step is to discern, was this oath still serving my highest path, or was it a cage that needed to be broken? Meditate on whether the vow drew you closer to truth or away from it. Seek guidance from spiritual teachers, sacred texts, or even divination practices if you feel called. If the oath was aligned, then your work is restoration. If it was misaligned, your work is conscious release. Step 3. Repentance and atonement. If you determine that the vow was true and worthy, then repentance becomes necessary, not as groveling, but as realignment. Repentance means to turn back, to return to the original intention. Practical forms of atonement vary by tradition, but the essence is universal. Prayer or mantra repetition to purify the subtle body. Fasting or abstinence to restore discipline. Acts of service to balance the karmic ripple outward. Pilgrimage or retreat to rededicate oneself in sacred space. The point is not punishment, but restoration of resonance. Imagine a harp string retuned. It must be tightened again until it vibrates in harmony. Atonement is this tuning process. Step 4. Ritual of release. If the vow was false, toxic, or outgrown, then release is necessary. This can be done through ritual, intention, and symbolic acts. A simple but powerful practice. Light a candle and place before you a bowl of water. Write the oath on a piece of paper in as much detail as you remember. Speak aloud. I release myself from this vow with gratitude for its lessons and with freedom for my soul. Burn the paper, letting the ashes fall into the water. Pour the water into the earth, returning the energy to the greater cycle. Such rituals help the subconscious integrate the release. If possible, seek the blessing of a teacher, elder, or guide, someone who can witness and affirm the unbinding, as many traditions teach that vows bind most deeply when witnessed, and so must be released with witness.
Step 5. Forgiveness of self. Perhaps the hardest step, forgiving yourself. Many who break vows fall into despair, believing they have doomed their soul forever. But remember, the true danger is not the broken vow, it is the refusal to heal. Practice self-forgiveness daily. Use affirmations such as, I honor the lesson of this broken vow. I forgive myself for past ignorance, and I walk forward in truth. My soul is whole, even as I learn from fracture. Forgiveness is not a dismissal of responsibility, it is the transformation of guilt into wisdom. Step 6. Craft new alignment. Once you have released or atoned, the final step is to craft a new alignment. This does not always mean swearing new vows. Sometimes the wisest path is to live without formal oaths for a time. Instead, focus on living in integrity moment by moment. Practical techniques. Daily intention setting. Each morning, declare aloud, today I align my words and actions with my highest self. Mindful speech. Speak only what you mean and mean only what you speak. This retrains the power of the word. Sacred silence. Spend time each day in silence to reattune to the inner voice before speaking outwardly. Journaling. Record when you feel aligned and when you feel fractured. This builds self-awareness and prevents unconscious repetition. When ready, if you do choose to take new vows, do so with deeper understanding, humility, and patience. Do not swear hastily. As the Hermeticists said, swear not unless you swear by eternity. A living example. Imagine a monk who swore a vow of celibacy but broke it in weakness. For years he is tormented by guilt, believing his path is over. Yet through confession, fasting, and renewed devotion, he realigns himself, not by erasing the mistake, but by deepening his compassion for all who struggle. His broken vow becomes the soil in which humility grows. Now imagine another seeker who swore a vow of silence in youth, but decades later finds that silence is strangling her gift of teaching. She releases the vow with ritual, honors it as a stepping stone, and steps into her true dharma of speaking wisdom. Her broken oath becomes a doorway to freedom. In both cases, the broken vow is not the end, but the beginning of a deeper alignment. Final keys to remember. Words are power. Speak vows sparingly, but honor them deeply. Broken vows are teachers. Do not despair. Learn the lesson they carry. Restoration is possible. Through atonement, release, and forgiveness, harmony can return. Integrity is the true oath. Beyond ritual promises, the greatest vow is to live each moment in truth. The practical path is not about clinging to perfection, but about conscious alignment. Breaking a vow may scar the soul, but scars can be sacred. They remind us of where we faltered and where we grew strong again.
What then truly happens when a spiritual oath is broken? We have journeyed through the stories of kings and monks, shamans and mystics, uncovering the universal truth. An oath is not just a promise, it is a living bond between the human soul and the eternal. To break it is to disturb the harmony of that bond, to invite dissonance into the very music of one's being. Yet, like all dissonance, it can either descend into chaos or resolve into a higher harmony. The choice lies in how we respond. When an oath is broken unconsciously, buried in denial, forgotten in distraction, it festers. It becomes a shadow that drains life force, a karmic pattern that repeats until we are forced to face it. This is the path of suffering, where the soul resists its own healing. But when an oath is broken and then consciously acknowledged, when we dare to look directly at the fracture, a new possibility awakens. The brokenness becomes a teacher, the guilt becomes a guide, and the scar becomes a symbol of deeper wisdom. This is why across traditions, rituals of atonement, confession, and release exist, not to punish, but to transform. The gods, the spirits, the universe itself are not cruel judges waiting to smite us for imperfection. They are mirrors, reflecting back the vibrations we create, urging us toward greater alignment. And alignment is always possible, no matter how far we have strayed. So if you carry the weight of a vow once broken, know this: you are not doomed. You are being invited into deeper integrity. Your path is not over. It has simply entered a more serious chapter. Whether through repentance, release, or renewal, the soul can always return to harmony. Remember, the true oath is not the words we speak once in ritual or ceremony. The true oath is the life we live every day. The vow to honor truth, to act with integrity, to align word, thought, and action with the deepest calling of the heart. Every sunrise is a chance to renew that vow. Every breath is a covenant with the universe. And so the final mystery is this: breaking a spiritual oath is not merely a fall from grace. It is an initiation. It forces us to see how fragile our words can be and how powerful they truly are. It teaches us that alignment cannot be taken lightly. It shows us that even from the ashes of betrayal, the fire of truth can be rekindled. Perhaps that is why so many sages warned us about oaths, yet also forgave those who faltered. For they knew, the soul is not defined by the vows it keeps or breaks, but by its relentless return to the center, again and again, until it becomes one with the eternal. So ask yourself, what vows are you living by now, consciously or unconsciously? Which align with your highest truth, and which may need to be released? And most importantly, what daily oath will you keep, not out of fear, but out of love, for your own soul? If these reflections have stirred something within you, let them not remain as mere thoughts. Carry them into your life. Live each day as if it were a sacred vow, each word spoken as if it were a thread in the fabric of eternity. And if you seek to walk further on this path of hidden wisdom, join us, subscribe, reflect, and continue the journey. For every teaching we uncover together is another step toward the deepest alignment of the soul.